When you think of Paul McCartney, the image that usually comes to mind is that of the charming Beatle with his unmistakable bass lines and that familiar, mischievous sparkle in his eye. The mastermind behind timeless classics like Yesterday, a global music legend who forever changed the landscape of pop. But beneath the polished knighthood and the anthem-filled stadiums lies a man with a keen sense of judgment and an even sharper tongue. While Paul has long maintained a diplomatic front in public, those who've had the chance to work alongside him know a different side, one that is unfiltered and unafraid to speak his mind when it comes to music. He's clear about what hits the mark and what falls flat. Over the years, that straightforward honesty led him into quiet but fierce battles with some of the biggest names in the industry. These clashes weren't just personality feuds. They cut to the heart of what music should represent. Today, we're peeling back the curtain on the 6 bands that Paul McCartney just couldn't stand, proving that even legends aren't exempt from his sharp critiques. It all begins with a rivalry that helped shape an entire era. The Rolling Stones. Were they mere blues imitators or genuine contenders? For decades, the world watched the Beatles and the Rolling Stones as if they were the ultimate musical foes. A legendary rivalry that fueled each band's fire. Fans loved to pit them against each other, celebrating what seemed like a friendly competition between 2 titans of rock. Behind the scenes, Paul's feelings were far less congenial. During a quiet session at Abbey Road in '68, he reportedly let slip a biting opinion, branding the Stones as a blues cover band that just happened to get lucky. This sharp jab stayed under the radar back then, but set the stage for a simmering tension that would last for years. Jump ahead to 2021, and Paul hadn't softened much. In a candid interview with The New Yorker, he reiterated, "Stones are a blues cover band. Our net was cast a bit wider." Naturally, Mick Jagger didn't stay silent, firing back with a sly joke about the Beatles being just 4 guys and 1 drummer, an ongoing playful jab at Ringo's musical prowess. Those close to Paul reveal he always saw the Stones as followers, chasing Beatles innovations and releasing albums that echoed themes the Beatles had already mastered months earlier. A particularly tense moment happened in '69 when John Lennon floated the idea of producing a Stones record. Paul was furious, reportedly questioning why John would waste time on what he considered a derivative band. While McCartney has offered occasional compliments on certain Stones songs, his praise always carries a subtle edge. During interviews, you catch a cool undertone, a hint of unfinished business. Paul could be this candid with his peers from the same generation. Just wait till you hear what he thought about the punk rockers, who tried to turn everything upside down. Punk rock was a thorn in Paul McCartney's side. Raw, chaotic, and defiantly unrefined, it stood as the complete opposite of the musical perfection Paul had worked tirelessly to craft. At the center of this storm were the Sex Pistols. When they exploded onto the scene in '76, their sneering rejection of everything traditional wasn't just music. It was a direct challenge to the Beatles' legacy. To Paul, their sound was more than noise. He reportedly described it as an assault on the ears, baffled by how anyone could take pride in such unskilled performances. But the feeling wasn't one way. Johnny Rotten, the Pistols' infamous frontman, didn't hold back, branding Paul a dinosaur, an outdated figure of the establishment punk rock vowed to dismantle. The tension between them wasn't just about music, it got personal. According to Wings drummer Denny Lane, the Sex Pistols once used Beatles posters for target practice during rehearsals. Paul tried to brush it off with a laugh, but those close to him say it struck a deeper nerve. In early 1977, both bands happened to be recording at London's AIR Studios. When Paul encountered the Pistols in a hallway and offered a friendly greeting, Sid Vicious muttered, "Establishment sellout," under his breath. That was the final straw. Without a word, Paul turned and walked away, severing any chance of camaraderie forever. What's striking about these stories is how much Paul's views reveal his unyielding commitment to his craft. He wasn't just defending his place in music history. He was protecting a vision of artistry he believed in passionately. Criticisms weren't petty. They were born from a place of intense respect for music's potential. Whether it was the Rolling Stones' blues influences or punk rock's rebellious uproar, Paul held a mirror up to these movements and didn't hesitate to speak what he saw, even if it ruffled feathers. That same fierce dedication has defined his career for more than half a century. It's not just about conflict. Behind the sharp remarks and tough stances lies a fascinating journey of evolution, rivalry, and undeniable influence. Paul McCartney's story is one of relentless pursuit of musical excellence, wrapped in layers of complicated relationships and changing tides. Even now, his opinions carry weight, reminding us that legends aren't just defined by their hits, but also by the battles they fought to keep their art true. As the music world keeps spinning, McCartney's legacy remains a powerful force, both adored and contested, just like the era he helped to shape. Years down the line, Paul McCartney would admit, somewhat reluctantly, that punk music did serve a purpose. It shook things up and cleared the air in the music scene. Yet when pressed about the Sex Pistols specifically, his response remained cool and guarded. A curt, "Not really my thing," delivered with a sharp glance that spoke volumes beyond the words. This wasn't a feud born of simple rivalry. It was an icy dismissal from a man who had built his career on precision and melody. But the next clash wasn't rooted in rebellion or disdain. It sprang from a place of admiration that quickly crossed into irritation. Oasis, were they paying homage or just pushing too hard? McCartney had seen countless bands try to echo the Beatles' magic, but none so loudly or brazenly as Oasis. As British rock stormed back in the 1990s, the Gallagher brothers arrived not just as fans, but as self-styled successors to the Beatles' throne. They copied the look, the swagger, and even the poses, wearing their devotion on their sleeves. Publicly, they credited the Beatles as their inspiration, boldly claiming, if not for them, there would be no Oasis. To most, it seemed like flattering reverence, but Paul saw something less genuine. Initially, he kept things polite, complimenting Oasis on their energy and passion. Behind closed doors, his patience wore thin. Mimicry felt shallow, a mere marketing angle rather than a heartfelt tribute. What annoyed him wasn't just the imitation, but the arrogance it carried. Noel Gallagher's boast that Oasis was bigger than the Beatles, echoing Lennon's famous 1966 remark, lacked subtlety and respect. To Paul, that wasn't flattery. It was hubris wrapped in loud guitars. He believed Oasis hadn't earned their lofty comparisons, dismissing their sound as bombastic and self-important, devoid of the soul and depth that true artistry demands. "You can't just copy the chords," he once confided in a friend. "You have to live the life." More than anything, he resented the entitlement. Oasis acted like they were owed the Beatles' legacy rather than forging their own path. To Paul, they were chasing shadows, not creating something real. There was one group whose mimicry cut even deeper, and strangely enough, they managed to embed themselves into Beatles history despite it all. The Monkees, a manufactured phenomenon with catchy tunes, a hit TV show, and a legion of devoted fans. To Paul McCartney, they were a frustrating caricature. He reportedly dismissed them as nothing more than a plastic imitation. Beatles' assistant Alistair Taylor once shared how Paul would switch radio stations the instant a Monkees track came on. It wasn't just their sound that bothered him. It was their entire existence. While Paul had sweated it out playing gritty clubs in Hamburg, sleeping in cramped, rundown rooms, grinding through countless live shows, the Monkees were four actors pretending to be a band, handed instant fame without paying their dues. The breaking point came when the Monkees began mimicking the Beatles' psychedelic phase after Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band dropped. George Harrison recalled Paul venting, "They're stealing our blueprint without doing any of the work." This simmering frustration even bubbled up in real life. At a 1968 party in Los Angeles, Paul reportedly cut short a conversation with Monkees frontman Mickey Dolenz, who later admitted, "I don't think he ever saw us as real musicians." Even as the Monkees fought for creative control and started writing their own songs, Paul's opinion remained unchanged. In a 2011 interview, when asked about the band, he offered a classic McCartney backhanded compliment. Catchy tunes, but certainly no Beatles. The smile may have softened over time, but the cool distance never faded. Next came a group that didn't imitate the Beatles. They overtook them. The Bee Gees, masters of the disco era, rose to dominate the charts right when Paul's own momentum began to wane. By the late 1970s, the rock world was shifting gears, and disco was claiming center stage. The Gibb brothers, with their soaring falsettos and the seismic success of Saturday Night Fever, were hailed as pop visionaries leading a fresh musical wave. To most, they were geniuses, reinventing the sound of a generation. But Paul McCartney saw something else. To him, they were Beatles light, recycling familiar formulas dressed up in flashy vocals and drum machines. The Bee Gees weren't breaking new ground. They were repackaging what had already been done, only louder and shiny. The rivalry was less public, but no less real. Paul's frustration grew as he watched the Gibb brothers' meteoric rise, feeling his own influence slip beneath the glitz of disco's glossy surface. The transition wasn't easy for a man who had shaped the soundtrack of the 60s, and this new era of polished beats and dance floor anthems felt alien, even threatening. Still, Paul kept his composure in interviews, though his words sometimes carried a hint of cool dismissal. The music industry was evolving, and with it, the players and their battle. What's fascinating is how these feuds, whether rooted in rivalry, admiration, or irritation, reveal a man fiercely protective of his legacy and deeply passionate about the art of music itself. It's a reminder that even icons who changed the world still wrestle with how they're remembered, how their influence is wielded, and how others follow in their footsteps. As the story continues, we'll explore more of these unexpected conflicts and surprising moments that shaped not just Paul McCartney's career, but the music we all grew up with. What happens when respect collides with rivalry, when admiration tips into resentment? Stay with us as the saga unfolds. Years later, Wings guitarist Lawrence Juber revealed that Paul McCartney would listen to Bee Gees' hits with a dismissive sneer, muttering, "Same three chords as everyone else, just faster." Behind that cool exterior, his frustrations simmered, especially as the Bee Gees shattered Beatles records one after another. The tension boiled over in 1979, when both artists found themselves recording in the same Miami studio. Rather than chance an awkward encounter, Paul deliberately rearranged his schedule to avoid crossing paths with the Gibb brothers. An engineer on site recalled casually mentioning yet another Bee Gees chart-topping success, only to see Paul's jaw tighten and eyes narrow in silence. In moments calling for grace, the cold undercurrent was unmistakable. When Maurice Gibb passed away in 2003, Paul's tribute was brief and clinical, a stark contrast to the heartfelt farewells he gave other music legends. Observers noticed this reserved response, whispering that the rivalry and buried resentment never quite left. Punk rebels and disco royalty sparked irritation, nothing compared to the band that challenged Paul the most, the Beach Boys. His complex feelings about them mixed admiration, rivalry, and a tinge of sorrow. Paul famously called God Only Knows a perfect song, but beneath that praise lay a decades-long tension. When the Beach Boys' groundbreaking album Pet Sounds arrived in 1966, it wasn't just another record for Paul, it was a revelation. He listened obsessively, dissecting every harmony, arrangement, and emotional nuance. Beatles producer George Martin even credited Pet Sounds for igniting the creative spark behind Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Yet admiration soon twisted into competition. Brian Wilson's follow-up project, Smile, became Paul's focus. But when Wilson abandoned it amid mental health struggles, Paul's empathy cooled. "If you can't finish what you start, you shouldn't be in this business," Paul reportedly said, emphasizing grit over vulnerability. Friction came to a head one evening at a dinner party at Brian Wilson's home in 1967. Paul unintentionally dissed several Beach Boys tracks as simplistic and repetitive, leaving Wilson so hurt he reportedly went silent for days. Even years later, Paul's praise of the Beach Boys often felt tempered. "Had beautiful harmonies," he'd say, "but I think people overstate their influence. We were already charting new territory." In revisiting God Only Knows, Paul's compliments came with caveats, calling it perfect, yes, but only for American pop of that era. Music historian David Leaf summed it best. Paul respected Brian's genius, but would never fully admit how much it shaped the Beatles, because to do so meant acknowledging that his musical empire wasn't built in isolation. That unspoken truth is the sharpest edge of Paul's rivalry. Not just who he couldn't stand, but who he couldn't fully embrace as an inspiration. So here it is. 6 bands Paul McCartney quietly but fiercely resented. From punk provocateurs who mocked his legacy, to disco icons who overtook his charts, to musical visionaries who inadvertently lit the fire under his creativity. Even the most legendary names weren't immune to Paul's exacting scrutiny. Some feuds were about artistic differences, others about ego or imitation. But one thing is clear: behind that charming grin was a man fiercely protective of the legacy he helped forge. The boy who once dreamed of a musical revolution remained stubborn, because behind every legend, there's always a little drama simmering beneath the surface. When it comes to Paul McCartney's financial and luxury lifestyle, his journey tells a story of careful planning and smart investment. For the decades, Paul has owned a fleet of luxury cars, including a sleek Rolls-Royce Phantom and a classic Aston Martin, symbols of his enduring taste for elegance. His wrist often sports high-end watches like the Patek Philippe Nautilus, a subtle nod to timeless craftsmanship. Real estate-wise, Paul's portfolio is impressive, with sprawling estates in Sussex, England, and a private island retreat in the Caribbean. He's known to travel in style aboard private jets, blending comfort with privacy. Beyond music, Paul has built a savvy business empire, investing in publishing rights, launching successful collaborations with luxury brands, and holding stakes in music streaming ventures. His career-long attention to insurance, from health policies to asset protection, underscores a strategic approach to securing his legacy. Biggest lesson from Paul's financial path? Blend passion with prudence. Protect your creativity, but also plan wisely for the future. That balance has allowed him to remain not just a musical legend, but a lasting icon of success. From raw beginnings in Liverpool's working-class streets to global superstardom, McCartney's story is one of evolution. Struggles met with resilience, creative battles fought and won, and a legacy still echoing in every corner of music and culture. Tensions, the rivalries, the moments of doubt, they all shaped a man who continues to captivate and inspire. And that, perhaps, is the true mark of a legend. And there you have it. 6 unforgettable chapters in Paul McCartney's secret history of rivalry, respect, and regret. From the disco-fueled rise of the Bee Gees to the sun-soaked harmonies of the Beach Boys, we've peeled back the polished layers and uncovered the quieter storms behind the legend. Who would have guessed that the man known for spreading peace and love harbored such sharp edges beneath that charming grin? It's been a wild journey through jam-packed studios, ego-clashing dinner parties, and icy tributes that said more in silence than 1,000 words ever could. And let's be honest, who knew studio scheduling could feel like a high-stakes chess game? But McCartney played to win. Whether it was sidestepping the Gibb brothers in Miami or throwing shade with a smile at Brian Wilson's simplistic track, Sir Paul knew how to stay ahead. Quietly, coldly, and always calculated. We saw how admiration became obsession, and how inspiration twisted into rivalry. We learned that even music's most influential figures aren't immune to the sting of someone else stealing the spotlight. McCartney, for all his praise, always had one eye on the scoreboard. Every chart broken by the Bee Gees, every genius harmony from Wilson, he felt it. And while the world saw unity in rock and roll, behind the curtain was a man defending his empire with unwavering intensity. So what do you think? Were McCartney's grudges justified, or just a perfectionist's private war with evolution? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's get a real conversation going. Hey, if you enjoyed diving into the untold side of one of music's biggest legends, go ahead and hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. We've got even more backstage drama, iconic showdowns, and surprising stories coming your way. You won't want to miss what's next. We're talking about a rock star who walked away from fame at his peak, and another who faked their public image for years just to survive in the industry. The stories get deeper, the secrets get wilder, and we're just getting started. For sticking with us. And remember, behind every Beatles hit and iconic bass line, there was a man quietly competing with the very legends he admired. Because in the world of music royalty, even Paul McCartney knew legends don't just sing history, they rewrite it.